Welcome to the Art of Living podcast. I'm Zafar Majid, and today we are going to talk about Asians going into hospital with livers just as bad as alcoholics. Does that mean that they are taking to alcohol in their masses? No, it does not. We'll find out shortly when we speak to our special guest who is in the studio today, Dr. Nasir Hussain, who is a specialist in liver medicine, is a specialist registrar, and he works in the NHS, and he will be telling us why, in a short moment, Asians are going into hospital with livers which are deteriorated as bad as alcoholics. But first, just a humble request, please subscribe to our channel to be notified of future content and programs. And now we go to our guest, special guest, Dr. Nasir Hussain. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Zafar.
How are you? Okay?
Alhamdulillah, it's lovely to be here.
Jazakallah for taking the time to be with us today. And we have a very special topic which is not talked about much in our community. And I know how this came about is that we had a social chat and we realized that this is something that we really need to be bringing out to the masses in terms of showing people the state of the condition of Asian people's livers.
Yes, definitely.
You may start us off as to why are they as bad as alcoholics?
Well, it's interesting because, we could spend hours talking about Asians and health just in general.
Okay.
And I guess a good topic to start with is the liver. It's what I specialize in. But let me ask you, Brother Zafar, if it's okay, what do you know about the liver? If I was to mention the liver to you, do you know where it is? Do you know what it does? When I say liver, what do you think?
Thank you so much for putting me on the spot. I thought I was asking all the questions.
But it's just to get an idea of what our communities might think, because it's not the same as the heart. If I asked you to talk about the heart, you'd probably be able to tell me about the heart quite easily.
You see, majority of us have this misconception. The bad diet is affecting the heart.
Yes.
More importantly and mostly rather than the liver.
Yeah.
And the liver is the one that we are probably the most neglectful of.
And the reason for that is it doesn't get the same kind of attention.
Okay.
Heart disease, we all know about it, we all hear about it. But if I was to ask you about liver disease, and I say the word liver and I say disease, what comes to your mind?
Alcohol.
Yeah. It's not something that's really associated with our communities typically,
Yeah.
especially in the Western world.
Just for the benefit of the viewers, I know, but where is the liver exactly in relation to our anatomy?
So it's one of the largest organs in the abdomen.
Yeah.
And if we think about where our lungs sit, that takes up the top of your whole chest.
Yeah.
Your lungs, and then you've got your heart sat in the middle, essentially. Yeah. The liver then sits on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
But it's such a large, powerful and important organ, it extends across to the other side. It's a very large organ. So it's almost a triangular-shaped organ. And if we get the opportunity, I can show you a picture, or we can share a picture of what the liver looks like inside the body.
We will actually, whilst we're speaking, an image will be shared so we can see where the liver is in the whole human anatomy, and what it looks like as well.
Yeah, that'd be really good.
Yeah.
And I guess the next question is, so liver disease, alcohol. That's the common thing that people think about.
Yeah.
And in the Western world, alcoholic liver disease is the primary disease that's associated with the liver, but that is changing. Something's taking over. Something, unfortunately, that us Asians are all too familiar with. And it's a condition known as fatty liver disease.
Okay.
Or commonly referred to as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, because the appearance of the liver in this condition is almost identical to that of an alcoholic's liver disease.
So is this when you're looking at them physically, the state of deterioration is exactly the same as the person who is an alcoholic?
Yes. In fact, the most easiest way to differentiate between the two is by taking a history from the patient.
Okay.
They're so similar that the only way to really distinguish is to ask if the patient has a history of significant alcohol use. So if you were to take a biopsy or a sample, the appearance under a microscope would be similar. So we're talking about a condition which is starting to become more prevalent in our communities that is identical to something that we would have never even associated with our communities, alcoholic liver disease, known as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Silly question, but does that mean that the person is necessarily fat?
Exactly. That is The best way to mention it is, the politest way,
Yeah.
is they would be typically overweight.
Okay.
So people that present with a condition, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, tend to be overweight, diabetic, and have high blood pressure. Now, if I was to ask you to name how many friends that you have who have chronic conditions, I'm sure diabetes.
So many. What I'm finding, which is probably the most astonishing thing, is that I'm past my 40s. I know I don't look it, but a lot of my friends, I know they're on that borderline of being diabetic.
Yes.
Yeah, and I know of people below the age of 40, Asian people, who are, again, either diabetic or borderline diabetic.
Yeah. And that's exactly the case. The risk factors that predispose you to diabetes and high blood pressure are the same risk factors that predispose you to fatty liver disease. And liver disease as a whole is increasing. And that's in keeping with what we see. Obesity is a pandemic in the Western world.
So is this something that surprised you as well when you, before you went into this field, you were obviously probably not aware how it's affecting the Asian community?
So there would have been some awareness, some understanding, but I wouldn't have expected to see so many familiar faces, people that are from the same community, in hospitals than I would have expected. It certainly it used to be, and it was alcohol that was a primary condition, and now we're seeing fatty liver disease start to take over. In fact, it's estimated to be the leading cause of liver disease in the Western world in the next decade.
So what's the actual treatment for it?
Now, the best treatment for anything is prevention. Prevention.
Okay, we'll come on to that. But so I've gone into hospital now. I've got this acute liver disease where my liver is damaged.
Yeah.
So can we reverse that damage, or do I need a new liver transplant? So where am I with that?
So when it comes to the liver, there's a spectrum of conditions or treatment that would be available. The main majority, the most definitive treatment for liver disease, when the liver disease gets so significant that the liver's failed, and in fact, what we'll do is we'll put up a picture of what a healthy liver looks and what
It's already on the screen.
abnormal liver screen looks like.
Okay.
And when it gets to that stage, what we call a cirrhotic liver, we're talking about a liver that's now shriveled, scarred, unable to perform its function. Then you're thinking about treating the complications that result, because you've lost the liver essentially, and seeing if somebody's fit for a liver transplant. And now we're talking a serious major operation. And major operations come with risks. One of the biggest risks are increased if you have diabetes and high blood pressure. So you're predisposing yourself to an option that you may not even be healthy enough to undertake.
Right, okay. So where does a person go from there then?
So what I would like to do is try to get people to appreciate their liver, what it does, why it's important. Now, we've talked about where the liver situates. The function of the liver. Do you know what our liver's designed to do? Why we have a liver? What's its job?
Clean the blood.
There's a very, very good answer, actually,
Yeah.
and a very simple way of putting it.
Yeah.
Why does it clean the blood? Why would the blood need to be cleansed?
To remove the toxins in our bloodstream.
So the liver's been reported on and said to have over 500 functions. That's how important it is.
Really?
And you would understand the liver's function if we understood where it came into where it fits into the circulation of our bodies.
Okay.
So you eat food. Our intestines and our stomach are surrounded by loads of blood vessels, right? Their job there is for them to absorb all our digested food. So anything you eat goes into your stomach and your intestine, it's absorbed into the bloodstream. Where do you think that bloodstream takes all of that? Where's the first place, that blood that's just absorbed everything you've eaten essentially, where does it go?
In the liver.
Yeah, I gave the answer away there, really nice.
Yeah.
And that's why your answer was spot on, to clean the blood. We've just got all of this freshly absorbed blood from what we've eaten, and it goes to the liver. The liver's job there is to cleanse it, detoxify it, take out any essential nutrients to help synthesize important nutrients, proteins, enzymes, hormones, everything that's vital in the body. The liver will produce that using the nutrients from there. It gives it a cleanse, it gives it a detox. It takes out spare energy. So glucose is stored in the liver where we have excess glucose. We live in a world where we've got beyond excess glucose now. Once this blood is cleansed, where do you think it goes next?
trying to remember my biology days now. It goes to the kidneys.
It goes straight to the heart.
Really?
And the reason it goes to the heart is that blood is now ready to be pumped around the body.
Right, okay.
So everything we've absorbed from our intestines, everything we've eaten, goes to the liver for that cleanse before it's pumped to the heart to be taken to the rest of the body. That's how important the liver
So
is.
if the liver's not done a good job in the first place of cleaning this blood, so does that mean that it still goes into the heart, and this blood that's being pumped around the body may not be so clean and detoxified?
This is exactly the issue. One of the conditions or complications of, just to put it simply, of advanced liver disease, when the liver's unable to perform its function, is a word known as hepaticencephalopathy. And what that essentially means is what's happening is blood that's supposed to be cleansed in the liver isn't being cleansed, and it's going to the brain with toxins that make you more likely to be confused, sleepy, and drowsy.
Wow.
It gives you an idea of how.
So is that when we hear people say, "I've just had a big meal,
Yeah.
I'm feeling lethargic," and or the wrong kinds of food make you drowsy?
No. This is a result of toxins not being cleared from a liver that's got advanced liver disease.
Okay.
So we're talking about people at a
Okay.
late stage. But I'll tell you what I found fascinating is I've just described to you the anatomy of the body briefly. And I've talked about how there's a massive stream of blood vessels that go to our intestines and our small intestines and our stomach to absorb our whatever we've eaten and digested. What becomes the most important factor there then? That blood is going there to absorb what's in our stomach and our small intestines, to
Right.
be taken to our liver and then pumped around the body. What's key in that process?
Is the kind of food that we've stored there in the first place.
What's in the stomach?
Yes.
And I'll tell you what's interesting is I remember reading a hadith, and correct me if this isn't quoted precisely, that said that the Prophet ﷺ talked about the stomach being a pond, and veins were like streams that came to the pond. If the stomach is unhealthy, the veins will return with illness.
Wow.
And if the stomach is healthy, the veins will return with goodness.
Look at the wisdom of the beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Over 1400 years ago, they told us about the anatomy of our body even before the scientists drew it out in the diagrams the way we know them today.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the knowledge of exactly how it works and the message. What's the key message in there?
Is you are what you eat.
I was going to say, it's a spot on that. It's a famous phrase we hear, but how much do we really take it in? How much do people focus on what they eat?
You see, this is one of the biggest. Again, this is the issue,
Yeah.
isn't it? That we are today talking about prevention rather than cure. Although I was interested to see what happens to the person when he gets to that last stages. Oh, it's obvious it's liver transplant, and even then, many people may not actually qualify for that transplant because of
Exactly.
the state of their health. So let's rewind back and look at the issues around prevention, where people like myself and people in my amongst my peers and friends and circles, they can take note and to ensure that they don't fall into that trap where they end up having that fatty sort of liver.
Exactly. And that would be the key. Because the liver is such an, alhamdulillah, again, we can only bless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with what they have given us.
Mhm.
But the liver has the amazing ability to regenerate when it's harmed.
Mhm.
And we see it in patients that have taken paracetamol overdoses and so on. There's a point at which they will recover by themselves with just some supportive care, some treatment. But the liver, after that insult, has the ability to heal itself up to a point. You continue to bash and attack that liver, there's a point where it will fail. That's the wisdom. To have an organ that has the ability to regenerate to a point gives you an idea of how vital that liver is.
So just to understand the kind of things that affect the liver, obviously alcohol is
Yes.
one. The foods, yeah.
Yep.
What else?
So drugs is another common thing. You will
Yep.
hear about paracetamol being harmful for the
Really?
liver. Yeah, and paracetamol overdoses. In fact, the reason it can be so fatal is because it can cause acute liver failure quite suddenly. And the liver being such a...
What do we talk about overdose? I mean, how many paracetamols in a day, or is it over a consistent period of time?
So, no, it would have to be, unfortunately, a method of suicide that could be quite effective would be paracetamol overdose. It's a drug that's quite common and people can get hold of. So if you're in a state where you're quite depressed and low.
So at this point, we put a disclaimer on there. So if anybody's thinking of committing suicide, do not go and take an overdose of paracetamol. And if you do, don't blame us that you heard it from our podcast.
But unfortunately, that's the case. It's an easily a drug that's easily available, and people don't appreciate how much harm it can really do.
We hear a lot where people are addicted to prescription drugs and painkillers.
So paracetamol, thankfully, is a very effective analgesia, very effective pain relief, which doesn't have addictive properties, and it's a very useful drug to take. And our ability and our liver's ability to break it down and process it is very good. Yeah. So you have to take quite significant amounts for it to cause damage to your liver. So it's a safe drug to use, and paracetamol is certainly a drug that I would advocate as a first-line treatment for people who have got pain or feel unwell, because it's very effective. But drugs is something that can affect the liver. It's a side effect of common drugs as well. You'll probably read on a packet liver impairment as a common side effect.
So what would you say is the biggest contributory factor? I mean, has food overtaken alcohol now, or alcohol still remains the number one factor in contributing to liver disease?
So for our communities, alcohol wouldn't even play a part. Okay. It would be our diet. Okay. And it would be what we eat. As the Prophet ﷺ has told us in this hadith that we've read, you are what you eat.
Yep.
And what you eat becomes that important. And it's only now there's a real, true appreciation of the impact and the usefulness of our diet, as well as the bacteria. So our guts are full of thousands, millions of bacteria, which have an important role in helping cleanse and break down foods and so on. And what we're seeing is a term known as the gut microbiome, which is the microbiology of the gut, the bacteria that line it. And we're seeing that if that microbiome is disturbed, it seems to be related to other health conditions. Again, highlighting
disturbed through the food that we eat, basically.
The food, what you put in your stomach is...
Okay, give us an example of what... I mean, this seems to be obviously a modern-day phenomenon in terms of the change of diet that we have now, or the kind of diet that we have now. So what kind of foods are we talking about? I mean, it may seem like an obvious question, but obviously we need to break it down, identify which are the main culprits in our food group. So
I'll be honest, it is common sense. If I was to, and it's, I don't know if laziness is the correct term, but people unfortunately like to eat what they eat, and they like their luxuries, even though they know that what they're eating is. If I was to ask, if you were to have a plate of food in front of you, you would be able to tell, anybody would be able to tell quite easily if that's healthy or not. And we're seeing relationships between, we know that an unhealthy diet, and I'm using the word broadly, but an unhealthy diet is associated with diabetes. It's associated with cardiovascular risk, ability to have a heart attack or a stroke. It is associated with this fatty liver disease. That's how important what you eat is and the effect it has on your body. And I'll refer to it again.
But could it be also that majority of our staple diet in the Asian community is not necessarily good for us?
Unfortunately,
I mean, just giving a typical example where we grew up as kids. Now, obviously, there's a lot more choice. But as kids, we grew up in households where traditional roti and curry was the main diet. So are you saying that's bad for us?
The way we make it and the amount of oil that goes into it, the amount of meat we have in our diet. So, I mean, I don't know, Zafar, if you have any knowledge of what the Prophet ﷺ's diet was like.
See, meat was something that the two main things. The meat was something they only ate on very special occasions on a limited basis. Whereas we eat meat a lot more frequently now. And secondly, it's like generally, I mean, if you classify overall meat, chicken and meat, we eat too much. And we eat it far more frequently. I mean, as a kid growing up, I remember in our household, chicken was only cooked on a Saturday. It was treated as a special dish that you cook on a Saturday because relatives or guests may come and you want to serve them a decent curry. So, but now, I mean, what I was explaining to somebody else as well, we cannot escape from the meat in our diet.
Yeah.
Just chicken, for example, is that it's in almost everything that we eat. At lunchtime, I just want to go and grab a baguette. It's going to be a chicken baguette. In the evening, I may have chicken and rice. And the next day, I may have a pizza, but it's got to have chicken in there. So chicken is something we can't escape from.
But and to be fair, it is meat in general.
Yeah.
You know, it is, like you said, it used to be a luxury.
Yeah.
We have it twice a day.
Yeah.
It's in almost everything that we eat.
And the difference is, back even during the time of the beloved Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even probably a few decades ago, the kind of chicken that they were eating was a lot more healthier, a lot more tayyib, organic, and healthy compared to the chicken today, which is grown on an industrial scale using chemicals.
That's a separate debate in itself. You know, what are these chickens injected with? You know,
Yes.
what are we then eating in ourselves? You know, this isn't a naturally grown, well-fed chicken. These are chickens that have been.
A friend of mine who's just come back from Bangladesh, he was telling me that even back in countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh, they are actually growing chickens on that sort of industrial scale where within a month they grow to be so heavy because they need to sell them, and it's all commercialized now. And they inject them with, actually it's estrogen that they inject them with to make sure that they grow very fast. And one thing I will mention about that, may not be related to our topic, when I see a lot of youngsters now whose diet is mostly dominated by chicken, and they actually are overweight, they look very like a bit like weak, even though big and weak, yeah. And a lot of them are actually showing signs of that estrogen that they are eating. Without sounding crude, they actually have it's like they're growing breasts, literally.
Yeah. There's a term known as gynecomastia.
What's that term?
Gynecomastia. So it's the medical term for male breasts, if you like.
Okay.
And you see it associated with lots of conditions. It's a sign of advanced liver disease as well.
Yeah.
That kind of picture. So I'm not surprised that you would say that. But there's something that's going wrong when we talk about common sense here. You do not need a lecture from a specialist dietitian, or you don't need to see a doctor to tell you what's a healthy diet. You know.
So we should be grilling more of our food.
So the amount of meat should be reduced.
Okay.
A Mediterranean diet is always referred to as the pinnacle diet to look at. But you need more fruit, you need more vegetables. Certainly, that grilled diet and so on. We need to reduce processed
But just to clarify that, even when we have vegetables, even if it's a vegetable curry, the way it's cooked, the actual goodness in those vegetables has probably been killed off.
I mean, a boiled food and boiled vegetables should retain majority of the goodness. And the key and the difficulty is, it's the same as when you're dealing with a smoker or somebody who's got any addiction. The diet is almost an addiction to try to tackle. And if you try to advise somebody to do too much too quickly, they find it almost impossible. And it needs to be those baby steps. And I think that's a methodology to be applied in all sciences. That slow, repetitive ability to try to make something go from the you might be able to explain this more. How do you make when you know something's bad for you, you've got the knowledge to translate that from your conscious to your subconscious.
But you see, it's no different to the alcoholic who's addicted to alcohol, and he knows it's bad for his health, it's damaging his liver, but he doesn't stop from drinking alcohol. It's no different to somebody who is addicted to this junk food, to this takeaway food. They know, as you just mentioned, that this is bad for you. The alcoholic knows the alcohol is bad for me. The junk food eater knows that this food I'm eating is bad for me, but he likes it. His nafs likes it. He eats it. He takes pleasure from it. But because that knowledge is on the top of his head, it hasn't really transferred down into his heart as a permanent feature in terms of the change of diet.
Yes.
Yeah. So he really needs to The alcoholic, when he has alcohol in front of him, he needs to resist that temptation. And if he consistently restrains himself and resists from drinking that alcohol, it's only then, from the conscious, it becomes a subconscious habit, a new pattern of his way of living. It's the same with the junk food eater. He needs to resist that temptation to eat those burger and chips or whatever that's causing the bad health for him. And it's only then, when they repeatedly are able to resist that, it becomes part of their subconscious mind to have a new dose. It could be the other way around, where you're consistently eating healthy food, and then it becomes a habit.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is where we need to get people to that stage. The first part, the purpose of our discussion, is to scare them up, wake them up,
to give them the knowledge.
Give them the knowledge to show them the damage, the long-lasting damage that they are doing and inflicting upon their health by having this bad diet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it also refers to a whole range of the different foods, especially in our community. The rice plow, the biryanis, the samosas, the pakoras, and the kebabs. It seems like all these things are a main sort of typical staple diet for us.
And it doesn't surprise you then that a risk factor for type 2 diabetes is being South Asian in origin.
Do we have a proportionally higher rate of type 2 diabetes in our community than compared to other communities?
Significantly. So
Wow.
South Asian ethnicity is a independent risk factor with type 2 diabetes.
Apart from liver disease, what other factors of heart diseases?
So
also
cardiovascular risk is higher among South Asians, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and they are all conditions that stem from what you eat. That's how important it is.
Dr. Nasser, the main thing is we've actually forgotten the etiquettes of eating as taught in the Sunnah way by our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
It's actually fantastic that you said that, because if you look at people, alhamdulillah, who are focused on trying to be more practicing, and what's the one thing that they are who are they trying to emulate to become better in their daily practice?
The beloved Messenger.
The way they have their beards, the way they dress, the way they read the Salah, they are emulating the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if you want to get better...
So why do they have a belly sticking out? Is that what you're trying to say?
What I'm saying is the emulation shouldn't stop at certain... you would be able to describe to us better. But when the Prophet ﷺ has taught us how to live in every aspect of our lives, our tummies should be emulating, and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And I think this is what you were just going to touch on now.
Yeah, basically, we've gone away from the teachings of the beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Number one is, when you eat, you do not eat up to your, stomach full. You have to eat 1/3 food, keep 1/3 for water, and leave 1/3 for air. But what we're finding is that when we're eating, we're enjoying something, we're tucking into that steak, and we're tucking into those kebabs and samosas. We eat so much that when we drink on top, then we have no space left for that water. It's like we're gulping that water down, and the food is right up the top of our windpipe. There's definitely no room left for air. So can you imagine the pressure on the intestines that is causing when you fill your stomach up so much with that food? And as you said, it's the wrong food. And the stomach is working overtime. The liver's working overtime to process all that food.
And one of the functions of that liver being to store excess glucose, excess fat. That's part of the reason, the pathophysiology, we say, how that liver started to become damaged, because it's taking on way too much than it should.
Most of us actually sit on dining tables now. When we go to restaurants and takeaways, we're sitting in these fancy sort of dining tables to eat. That also is against the Sunnah and the etiquettes of the way the beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam ate, because they sat on the floor. And there's actually 3 different, if I had more space, I'd actually show you how that they used to sit on the floor in a certain way, where you can squat or you can sit in that position when you're sitting on your knees in the salah position, or you can sit with one leg up, where it actually presses upon your stomach, so you're not eating to your sort of to the full amount of the stomach. And also, we've actually been commanded to stop eating whilst we are still in that little feeling that bit of hunger. We fill the stomach, and then the eyes are saying, let's eat more, let's eat more, let's eat more. We're not feeding the stomach, we're feeding the nafs.
And it's like I said, we talk about the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and you mentioned one there, to eat until a third of your stomach should be food, a third should be water, a third should be air. And I don't think this, to your listeners, this will be a new phenomenon that they've never heard before.
They've heard it, but they're not implementing it.
And as you mentioned, it's in the conscious, but it hasn't been downloaded into their heart. And how would they do that? By that repetitive behavior. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting strategy that's used for many things across the world. You know, people to fight addictions will use this slow repetition to try to make something a habitual behavior.
Absolutely.
So if I was to advise someone to try to eat, if I had the time to really sit down and talk to them and analyze their individual problem, the thing that you would say is just go 30 days without having meat or having meat once a week, to a point where once they do that for 30 days, they'll make it a habit. To sit on the floor when they eat, it will become a habit. To make sure they don't finish their meal feeling full.
Yeah.
As you said, that they feel that there's still a little bit of hunger, as is the sunnah. You tell them now to do that, and your listeners will hear that, and they know that. But it's not until they start to implement it under this methodology that you spoke about.
Dr. Nasir, one of the other strategies given to us by our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was fasting. But unfortunately, we've turned it upside down, where we do fast, but when we open our fast, we make up all the difference in terms of what we've missed out during the day, and we have all the wrong foods on that dinner table when we break our fast, because we feel we've been fasting all day, we need to treat ourselves, being a good boy, been doing something like fasting, but I now need to eat all the kebabs and the samosas and all the greasy, fatty foods to treat myself.
And you know who's done it, because you'll be standing next to them in Tarawih Salah and they'll be belching away. But yeah, this is the problem. I know people who say they put on weight during Ramadan. How is that possible?
That's the whole fallacy of the whole thing now. That our fasting was designed not only to give us a spiritual cleanse, but a physical cleanse as well. That in fact, we are finishing the month of Ramadan overweight and even in a worse condition than when we started.
And I think this is one of the worries is the sunnah that we have and the advice that we have given, or the example that have been set. Unfortunately, people seem to get excited if something looks technical, if it looks exotic. You know, if I was to give them a 10-point plan, that's what appeals to them. That must be scientific. That must be proven. So when you say eat a third, it sounds simple. And you give somebody something simple, it doesn't appeal to you.
That's why there's so many different diet plans out there.
Well, which is a diet that's become such a fad recently?
Was it Atkins?
The Atkins was famous for a while, and then the 5-2 diet.
What is that? Tell me.
Where you would fast for 2 days and eat for 5 days.
Okay.
And who's already taught us that you should do this?
You know, this is so sad that we as Muslims have already been given the actual answers. We have been given the solutions by our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We don't take them seriously. We question whether this is good or it's bad, or is it sunnah? I will leave it. But yet the modern day scientists, when they tell us, the modern day dietitians, when they tell us, we take it more seriously.
Exactly.
So, how does that reflect upon us as Muslims? We say we love the beloved Messenger, but we're not really following them.
And from knowledge that was given to us years ago. I mean, if I was to try to summarize, if somebody was to ask me, okay, how should I make my eating better? How should I improve it? I could either refer them to a dietetic website, which gives them a superior plan of all the different green foods and superfoods, or I could give them 4 prophetic sunnahs to follow. And that would be fast Mondays and Thursdays.
Well, but make sure you don't have a big treat at the end of the day, eh?
Yeah, exactly. And now's a good time to start. When you wake up when you would normally wake up.
Brilliant.
Now's a good time to try to implement that.
This is winter time, so just for the people who are listening to this in summer.
Yes.
So winter, the days that we are going through now, is the best time for people to fast because it's shorter days, but they need to be able to do them in a wise manner rather than, as I said, because a day's short. If they open their fast at 4:30, like Maghrib is at 4:30 now, then they think, oh, I better have a big feast because I've got a long night ahead of me. So it's all about moderation. Our Islam is about having a right balance and living moderately, and that should be applied to our eating habits as well.
Yeah. And then the second would be, like you said, a third should be food, a third of your stomach should be water, and a third should be air. And I had, it was mentioned that actually the advice was it should be a quarter. So even the third is almost like a blessing, a mercy.
Special concession for us.
But I had somebody ask me, well, how do you know when your stomach's a third full? It's a good question, actually. I'll tell you how. And it was quite simple. As our blessed teacher actually mentioned this, is you certainly know when you're full. So when you're full, because we eat to our fill a lot, have a look at what you've eaten.
Yeah.
And you know that's what fills your stomach. Just divide that into a third.
Wow.
Simple.
Yeah. And it's always better, even when you get up from the dinner table, that you probably feel a little bit of that hunger still, because it's only going to help you like manage yourself better, sleep better, be more mobile. You're not going to be feeling lethargic afterwards as well. And what I find is that no matter how much you eat, even when you're still eating and you feel that I'm still hungry, that feeling of fullness comes afterwards.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's best to stop while you're still feeling hungry, because whilst the food is still being digested, that feeling of fullness will come after. Because what mistake people make is, I'm still hungry. Okay, I'm going to have another plate of this. I'll take another roti because I feel that I need to eat more.
And do you know what's really interesting about what you said is that delay between our mind realise we're full before our eyes, and so we still feel hungry and we're gobbling away. And it's not until we now given it those few minutes that we're like, oh, now I'm too full. Whereas that we had that patience. And do you know another way to tackle that? Another sunnah to follow?
What's that?
Chew twice as long.
Yeah.
If you just take your time chewing your food, that feeling of fullness will finally catch up with you. And you will realize, wait, I don't need that extra bit. And I'll tell you what the beauty of that is. Why do we eat? Why do we love to eat?
To feel the taste.
The pleasure is all in the mouth, is in the taste. And again, our blessed teacher said there's a secret where you can eat, you can have the pleasure of your meal, your whole meal, or as if you were eating 2 of those meals, but only have to eat half. And that's by chewing twice as long, because the pleasure is all in the mouth.
I think one observation that I've made is whenever I've gone to events especially, is there's 2 things. Number one is there's a pressure to eat quickly.
Yes.
Yep. There's a pressure that you've got to eat this. And the second one is there's such a variety of food now, that which again, a good dietitian will tell you that you shouldn't be mixing different food groups up together as well.
We want to try everything.
We want to try and eat everything, which again goes against the etiquettes and adabs of eating, that we're eating too fast, we're eating so many different foods, and the fact is that we in the pursuit of trying to taste everything, we're not even really enjoying it, because we're so rushing to eat the next thing. Whereas I find the best meals are when you have a limited range of choice. Maybe it's only the one dish that you are eating. It could be just dal, right? But if you're hungry, that will taste like the best meal that you've ever had.
And again, a common phrase, when you're hungry, anything tastes delicious. It's a saying I can't quite remember.
that leads to another point, that you should only eat when you're hungry.
Yeah. Again.
What about this thing that we've got fixed in our mind that we have to have 3 meals a day?
This is part. So society plays a part, and now what's embedded in our usual practice. So unfortunately,
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner you have to have. And people would then feel, oh, I didn't have breakfast. That means I need to have a big lunch.
Yeah.
You didn't have breakfast because you probably weren't hungry.
Yeah.
And you get home and you're like, well, it's dinner time now. I should be eating. When you may not again even.
You may not need to eat.
Exactly. And the other part where society plays a part is our portion size.
Yeah.
Part of the reason you said is there's a need to want to eat everything, but there's a need to want to finish what's on your plate.
Yeah.
And the problem is we put far too much on the plate.
Yeah.
And if we just cut that down, I mean, a common thing for me personally is when I see a plate that doesn't look quite full, oh, that looks like an empty plate. Gosh, I should have a bit more there. But when I've actually eaten that, what looks like a smaller portion, I'm like, oh, actually, that was...
Yeah, sometimes you're forced to finish the plate because you poured too much as well.
Exactly.
And that's against the adabs of wasting food.
Yeah.
So the secret is don't overfill the plate in the first place. And there was something else I was going to say. Yeah, the thing that's entrenched into our mind, which only recently I've started going against that sort of thinking, is that having 3 meals a day.
Yeah.
I mean, recent times, I'll have a good breakfast, I'll skip lunch because there's no need for lunch. I've had a good breakfast. But whereas as we were growing up, do you remember, it's in the school system that you leave home, you have breakfast, then there's dinner time, lunchtime, then you have a dinner in the evening. So it's entrenched and embedded into us that we have to have these 3 meals a day. And I know, reading works, reading stories of Awliya Allah, the saintly people, how they used to eat little.
Yeah.
Many of them used to probably just eat once a day. And also, our beloved Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they went many days without having a meal. They used to survive maybe on dates, survive on limited rations. Yeah. And we should learn from their example.
And that's it. When we try to emulate the Prophet ﷺ in so many different ways, why not do it with how we eat?
Yeah.
And quite simply put. And I think that would be the biggest way. As you kindly put it at the start, we are what we eat.
Yeah. I mean, if you look around you, what you will notice is that without calling it obesity, it's quite safe to say that a lot more people are now overweight than any time previously in history. And I was watching a wedding film of a relative from 1991. So this is 31 years ago. And what I noticed in that wedding film, even though I was very, 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 very young, but all the other people, the adults, vast majority of them were skinny.
Yeah.
But now, if you look, people are more larger in their size. It's because of the fact that we are overeating. At that time, even 30 years ago, even in this country, people didn't have the luxury of eating out as much as we eat out now. They didn't have the luxury of having probably a greater disposable income where they can phone Just Eat and Uber Eats.
Yes.
And well, they didn't have Just Eats and Uber Eats then as well. But they wouldn't just phone and get food delivered to their house. That was a very alien concept then. This is more of a modern day phenomena where people are ordering food. People are now, you will see the food delivery cyclists and the drivers out in the morning delivering breakfast to people.
This obesity and being overweight, it is the true pandemic of this Western society now. And we're starting to see it in our developed countries. Yeah. Has, like you said, that access to cheap, easy processed food. And processed food, an unhealthy diet, red meat, they're associated with colorectal cancer, rectal cancers. The harm from these cannot be understated, but we seem to undervalue the importance. It's interesting. The mindset of how we look at people now has changed because how much people are now overweight. That people that are overweight are considered normal weight.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's only people that are extremely large that you think they're overweight. To have any excess tissue around their stomach, it's to be a fat stomach is normal weight. But now everyone thinks, having a little bit, that still makes me normal because overweight is that guy who's 10 times bigger. Mm-hmm. But it's just the way society and our perception now has changed because it's such a pandemic. Such a serious issue.
Dr. Nasir, it's been lovely to have you here. I just want to hear some last few words of wisdom. I mean, what is the biggest takeaway? Every single thing that we've discussed obviously a lesson for us for the prevention of this horrible disease and the damage we are inflicting upon our livers. But if there's one thing one message that you would like to give for people to take away, what would that be?
So before I give a summary message, I want to, it would be a message to our communities to have a true realization of how we are different to everybody else. Now, I was looking at some research done by the King's Fund, and they published some statistics from a survey that they did. This was a few years ago.
Sorry, what's the King's Fund?
King's Fund is it's a charity that does health-related research, and we can publish some of the data. Yeah, but a bit more. They're very reputable, and they do some very advanced research. And what they looked at was ethnicity and health inequality. Asians, South Asians, and especially Pakistani and Bangladeshi, were less likely than any other ethnic group to have 5 a day.
5 a day fruit and veg?
5 a day fruit. Okay. They were less likely than any other ethnicity to be physically active.
Wow.
Whoever's the ones.
That's something we haven't touched upon.
Yeah. And again, this is, like I said, we could be here all evening. But the biggest impact was amongst female Asians. And why? This could be a conversation for another day, but it would be interesting to explore why there's such huge health inequality amongst our population. Pakistanis live in the most socio-economically deprived areas. Is that a factor? Culture. We can talk about this again another day, but vaccine hesitancy is highest among the black and Asian communities, not amongst the white communities. Why is there that distrust, if you like, with vaccinations and accessing healthcare, being physically active? Racism may play a part. We know that from what we've learned that institutional racism unfortunately exists. You will have seen articles about the Metropolitan Police and so on, and WhatsApp groups that they've had where there's been racism exposed. And there'll be.
So you're saying there's institutional racism in terms of the distribution of resources in these communities?
Maybe may play a part. I think it's a very multifactorial. I think cultural perceptions, how we are.
I personally think that may be a very minimal aspect of it. More of it is to do with that, rooted into our cultural traditions. We're less inclined to go and exercise, go for walks in the park. We don't cycle as much as the other communities.
And this is something to address as well. So why did this survey show that Asian women were the least likely to be physically active?
I don't know.
And we all know that they are.
What do you think is the probable reason for that?
Well, again, it's that cultural perception. For some reason, to exercise means you have to leave the house. The kind of garments that are made typically for women to exercise, the duties that they probably carry around the house. There must be a lot of cultural stereotypes that probably limit them.
There's one answer I can give you on that, because I know a lot of the women in our communities don't like going to mixed gyms.
Yes.
And so the provision for ladies-only gyms is very less. And the ones who provide, say, ladies-only hour or sessions are very limited. But the other one, which I find which is very limited for the Asian women, is swimming.
Yeah.
Because they are unable to source ladies-only swimming pools.
I've got to say, swimming is an excellent cardiovascular exercise to engage in.
Okay.
Especially if you're already suffering with joint problems and being overweight, because that stress you would put on your knees or your back from walking, for example, or running, swimming helps eliminate that. But you're like, where would they go? Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's one of those dilemmas that probably needs another.
So we've identified it's not just the food, it's obviously the lack of activity which is attributing to these conditions, which are causing a huge untold damage to our hearts and livers and generally our overall well-being.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it is far too prevalent amongst our community.
Dr. Nasir, thank you so much for coming and enlightening us on this all-important topic and how we should be looking after our liver and not just focusing on things like heart and because obviously most people think about the heart and how that's affected with the food, but not realizing how the liver is also very, very important now, that needs that special attention and care as well. So inshallah, we shall continue this conversation. Dr. Nasser will be invited again, because this is a very vast topic, and health within our communities especially is a subject that we can be sitting here talking about for hours and hours. And inshallah, we'll bring more programs to yourselves to how to have a positive impact on our health, and how we can create a lifestyle that not only that will be conducive to our physical well-being, but mental well-being as well, and spiritual well-being. Jazakallah for listening. Inshallah, we'll see you again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.